Hi, it's Cynthia at Pretty Paper Blackbirds. In today's video, I'll show you how to take a 3D embossed image to the next level using some simple inking techniques. For today's card, I'm using the Gina K Designs Winter Wonderland die set. This die set comes with two small evergreen tree dies, and these small trees are the perfect size for the background of my card. I am going to die cut these from a heavier weight white cardstock. This is the same cardstock that I'm using for the base, so it is a 110-pound cover weight, and I will need one of the larger trees and two of the smaller trees. So I'll run these dies through my Gemini, and then I'll run that smaller die through a second time. I have two different colors of embossing glaze. I have Twisted Citron and Rustic Wilderness, and I've set up my workspace with two separate sheets of, this is just copy paper that I folded, and I am using a Ranger Distress Embossing Dabber in clear to apply the ink for the embossing glaze. I have also found that reverse tweezers work really well for holding these very small die cuts as I'm heat setting them. To get the nice, shiny, thick glazed look for these images is really simple. I'll show you the entire process on this largest tree die cut. I start by applying the embossing ink with the dabber. I am thoroughly coating the surface of the die cut with the ink, and then I just alternate between the two glazes. I'm really just applying this in a way that suggests highlight and shadow on each tree. So for this first layer, I'm applying the Twisted Citron primarily to the center of the tree, and then I'll apply the Rustic Wilderness to the edges. Once I've covered the surface of the die cut with my glazes, I will heat set this first layer, and then you just repeat this process. I built up 3 layers of glaze on each of these die cuts. And in this third layer, you can see that the color and the depth really start to build. You can really fine tune the light and the shadow on this third layer. I felt like my tree was getting a little too light, so I added more Rustic Wilderness here on the top. And here are my completed evergreen trees, and I really love the look of the light and shadow on these die cuts. Moving on to the front panel for the card. I am using cold pressed watercolor paper. This is 135 pound, and it is cut to 4 by 5 1/4 inches. And I'm just going to very lightly pencil in faint lines for my hills. I'm going to watercolor over these images, so I'm penciling in very, very lightly. I have one hillside that is sort of going from the left center of my paper down toward the lower right, and then another steeper hill that is going from the center left of the paper to the upper right. So again, I'm penciling these in very lightly, and then I'll go back over both of these lines with an eraser to remove most of the pencil line. Once you paint over this line with watercolor, you won't be able to remove the pencil. The watercolor set that I'm using here is from Jasper Stardust. I'll link to it in my blog. These are handmade watercolors. They're very highly pigmented, and the color that I'm using here, this beautiful light blue, is called Cob Matte. This is from the set called Wind and Rain. I am using watercolor for this card, but if you don't have watercolor or you prefer not to use watercolor, you could also just use Distress Oxide ink. This is tumbled glass. I have 2 templates here that I cut to create hillsides for a test card. So I have this top template for the top hill, the steeper hill, and then this template for the lower hill. I just freehanded these and cut these out with scissors. You can use an ink pad and a blending brush and just very lightly blend the ink above your templates with a blending brush. So I have my pencil lines for the hills, and I have a very light wash of color here in my palette. The first thing I'm going to do is just take some clean water and my number 4 watercolor brush. It's a number 4 round. And I'm just taking some clean water and I'm going along each of those pencil lines right above the pencil line and I'm laying down a very light application of clean water along those lines. Not a lot. You don't want the water to puddle, but you do want enough water that when you start laying down the wash of the blue color, the water will pull the paint up and it will start to blend and spread up from that pencil line. So I'm going to go back in now with my very light wash of blue. I'm starting with a light application and I will build the color from there. You can always add more color. And remember that watercolor does dry a little bit lighter than what you see as you're applying the paint. So always know that you can add a little bit more to deepen the color. I'm going to go back and pull in a little bit more of my darker color of blue here, and I'm just pulling it into my wash and then applying from the wash. I will continue to add color and build that up until I have the shade and depth of blue that looks right. Okay, my watercolor wash is complete and this is dry, and I'm ready to move on to some embossing. This is an embossing folder from Sizzix. It's called Pine Branches. It is a 3D embossing folder designed by Tim Holtz. I have misted the back of this panel very, very lightly with water, and then I'm just going to position this panel inside the embossing folder, and I will run this through my Platinum 6. The sandwich that I am using that works for me is the platform, the 3D embossing folder, plus 2 thin sheets of cardstock as shims. I will run this through my machine 3 times, and this will give me a really good crisp impression. I'm going to start to apply some color to this embossed image. I have a distress crayon in Fresh Balsam, and I'm going to just apply this with my finger. I saw Tim Holtz do this on one of his holiday hoopla videos, and it works really well. You can get the color exactly where you want it. So for this card, I'm going to apply the color just to the center of each of these pine branches. I'll make sure that I have my color mostly centered there, and then also very lightly along the outside edge of this entire left edge of the embossed image. Okay, I'm ready for the second layer of ink. I have a Distress Oxide ink pad in Rustic Wilderness, and I'm going to apply this to the paper directly from the ink pad. So the way to do this is to hold the ink pad very flat over the paper, and using light pressure, move the ink pad over the embossed area. The raised area will pick up the ink, and you can go over certain areas a second time if you would like to add some darker areas in your branches. I confess I was very intimidated the first time that I tried this, but I have found that the secret is to keep the ink pad perfectly parallel to the paper and keep the paper flat on the table as you're moving the ink pad very gently across the surface. I have my Tombow Mono Sand Eraser. This is one of my favorite tools. It works really, really well to clean up any little stray bits of ink. Next, I'm going to get the oxide properties in both of these inks working. I have some clean water and a paper towel, and I'm just using a tiny amount of water on the tip of my finger to lightly tap over each of these areas. And as the ink starts to react with the water, you get a really nice blended effect of the two inks. It really doesn't take very much water. You can see here that I'm dabbing off most of the water onto the paper towel before I tap. I'm also avoiding the very tips of the branches with this technique. You can oversaturate the ink there. I've given my front panel a few minutes to dry, and I'm going to move along to the greeting. I'm using the Hero Arts Year-Round Messages stamp set. I pulled out the Happy New Year greeting, and I'm lining that up on the front panel using my Misty. I'm going to heat emboss this greeting with Detail Silver embossing powder. So I will use my anti-static powder tool, and I will ink this up with Versamark ink. I give a lot of thought to color palette when I'm designing cards, and I really like this palette with the green, the silver, and the blue. Those are really nice, cool, wintry colors. They go well together. I've used my heat tool to melt that embossing powder on my greeting, and I am now ready to assemble the front panel of my card. I am using a liquid adhesive to adhere the trees to the front panel, and I will also use liquid adhesive to adhere each of these panels to the card base. I'm ready to glue these panels to my card base. I'll start by gluing this front panel to my green matte layer. This is Hero Arts Hero Hues 111 pound cardstock. The color is Palm, and this matte layer is cut to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8 inches. Again, I'm just using a liquid adhesive. And finally, I will adhere this panel to my card base. This is an A2 card base. It is flat size 5.5 by 8.5. I've scored it at 4 1/4 and folded that. And that will be my completed card. A full materials list will be up on my blog at prettypaperblackbirds.com. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've had a great holiday season. I'll see you in the next video.